Welcome back to NewsX World. I'm Devika Devan and you're watching Focal Length, where we get you a briefing on topics from across the world. The Israel-Gaza conflict remains unresolved, intensifying humanitarian crisis and challenging in hostage release. Experts explore 21st century solutions beyond the two-state options, shifting Middle East alliances and rising global anti-Semitism. U.S. trade policies and the SCO summit's influence add geopolitical complexity, while Russia and Ukraine conflict continues to dominate international focus. Joining us now is Mr. Jason Isaacson, Chief Policy and Political Affairs Officer, a veteran analyst of U.S. political and strategic affairs and a leading voice in international diplomacy, known for his decades-long advocacy for the Arab-Israeli peace and interfaith cooperation across the globe. Today, he discusses the Israel-Gaza conflict, humanitarian challenges, hostage release, Middle East shifts, and global geopolitical impact. Thank you for joining us, Mr. Isaacson. My first question to you, sir. Where do you view the Israel-Gaza war heading with no clear plan of action in place currently?
Well, thank you for asking, Devika. It's good to be back on NewsX World. Look, it's a very difficult situation that Israel faces. It is seeking the release of the now 48 hostages, living and dead, who have been held by Hamas for almost 2 years, 22 months. It wants to make sure that going forward, there is no longer the threat posed to Israeli civilians, Israeli security by Hamas, which has been embedded in that territory for well over a decade and has attacked numerous times, including the atrocities committed on October 7th, 2023, 1,200 dead, 251 captured, and held in brutal captivity for the last almost 2 years, except for the 48 who were still there. The need to release the hostages and to end the threat posed by Hamas is keeping Israel in Gaza to eliminate that threat and to push forward to a day after in which there will be no longer Hamas rule, in which the hostages are freed, in which Israel can withdraw its forces. But the continued threat posed by Hamas, the fact that it still fires missiles, the fact that it's still holding those hostages, poses a dilemma for Israel. The humanitarian situation is very bad. It has been the suffering of the Palestinian civilians who are caught in the crossfire because of the way Hamas embeds itself in the civilian population is a miserable situation. Israel wants to end this war as soon as it can, but it can only do so when it knows that it is no longer threatened by Hamas and that the hostages are freed. So it is trying to wrap this up, eliminating the last strongholds of Hamas, doing what it can to put further pressure on Hamas so that either through negotiations or through liberation by military forces, the hostages who have been held can finally come home to Israel. So I can't tell you an end date when this is going to end. I know that it is not in Israel's interest to stay in Gaza forever. They want to finish this conflict and end the threat posed by Hamas to the people of Israel.
Mr. Isaacson, you've raised a very pertinent point there about the release of hostages. But I also want to understand from you, on the flip side, how do you think Israel can continue to justify its operations in Gaza despite the impact on humanitarian aid?
Look, the suffering of Palestinians in Gaza who are not involved in this conflict, who are caught in the crossfire, is a horrible situation. There's no question about that. It is not Israel's intention to continue to harm civilians, but the problem is they're battling in a densely packed urban environment in which Hamas intentionally and cynically embeds itself in a civilian population, hiding under hospitals and schools and mosques and residences, so that the only way to eliminate this threat. By the way, there have been thousands and thousands of Hamas fighters who have continued to carry out this war against Israel. the only way to stop this threat is to go after them where they are. And that has unfortunately also led to many civilians being caught in the crossfire. The humanitarian situation is dire. On the other hand, Israel has surged humanitarian aid, especially over the last several weeks. There is the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation. There is also there are various UN agencies that are involved. There is increasing cooperation now between Israel and international agencies. Unfortunately, many international agencies and the UN itself tried to boycott this humanitarian effort that Israel had set up with US backing. I would like to see greater cooperation so that international agencies, UN, and the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation that was set up by the United States and Israel can finally get more aid into the affected area. But that kind of cooperation has been slow in coming. I hope that we'll see more of it in the future.
All right, Mr. Isaacson, I also want to understand from you then, in your perspective, what's the most significant obstacle to securing the release of the remaining hostages in Gaza?
Look, this war could end tomorrow. The hostages would come home. The suffering of the Palestinians in Gaza who are not involved in this conflict would end if Hamas released the hostages and laid down its arms. This is a terrorist force that has been in charge of that territory since seizing power more than a dozen years ago. It could end the suffering of the Palestinians and end the suffering of Israelis who are waiting for their family members to come home by just stopping this conflict and releasing the hostages, but it has refused to do so. There have been a number of ceasefire and hostage release negotiations that have gone aground. Hamas has walked away from these efforts. It insists on staying in power, maintaining its arms after the release of hostages, which will just mean a repeat of this cycle again and again in the future. It's not the first time that Hamas has broken an armistice or a ceasefire or a halt of attacks in the past. There have been a number of agreements over the last more than a decade where Hamas has fired missiles and Israel has responded, and then Hamas and Israel have come to an agreement and they have stopped that clash, but then Hamas has broken it, as they did on October 7th. So that the obstacle is Hamas refusing to put an end to this conflict.
Okay, interesting. Mr. Isaacson, coming to your idea on solutions, if not a two-state policy, what would be a 21st century solution to the Israel-Gaza conflict?
AJC, my organization, the American Jewish Committee, has long advocated a two-state solution as the most logical, rational, enduring potential resolution of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. We still believe that that's the direction that both sides should be pursuing, a negotiated two-state solution.
Okay.
Which will involve territorial compromises. However, it must be said that in light of what happened on October 7th, in light of the support for the atrocities of October 7th by many in the Palestinian population, as we saw in poll after poll, there is little traction right now politically in Israel for a two-state solution. And one could also say that among the Palestinians, there is less support for a two-state solution. That doesn't mean that leaders on both sides couldn't push in that direction, couldn't lay out the benefits of advancing toward a two-state solution. I believe that that's the best way to change the environment. And I think also the Arab states can play a role in that. The Abraham Accords, which we are for which we are marking the 5th anniversary and just later this month, should have given and still can give some political leverage to the Palestinians to advance their position in negotiations in the future with Israel. It is possible that with the Arab states working both for a reform of the Palestinian Authority, working for a change in the whole dynamic between Israelis and Palestinians through their contact with Israel as well as with the Palestinians, we could see a resolution of this conflict and finally the realization of that two-state solution that people have been yearning for so many years. That, I believe, is the best course. if we are not able to achieve a two-state solution, for a variety of reasons, I'm hopeful that we will find some other accommodation in which the rights of Palestinians, property rights, personal rights, freedoms, freedom from having military in their territory, freedom to conduct their own affairs, working side by side with Israel. There may be some other way to structure a political future for the Palestinian people.
Okay.
But one way or another, there has to be negotiations, and I'm hopeful that we'll get to that point, and I think the Arab states can play a role.
On that, I want to understand from you, as far as the Arab states are concerned, Mr. Isaacson, how do you think this conflict has reshaped alliances as well as realities in the Middle East?
Look, it's clearly prevented the kind of fulfillment of the promise of the Abraham Accords, which was expanded integration by Israel into its neighborhood, into the region. The mutual benefits that would flow from that kind of between Israel as a leader in tech and in security, in medical facilities and technology and agri-tech and water resource management, all of the benefits that Israelis' engagement in their neighborhood would offer to the Arab states. I believe that we'll find a way back to that full realization. But for now, there is, of course, a saturation in the media of the pictures and image and reports of the destruction taking place in Gaza, which has certainly turned many in the region against the possibility of a normal relationship with Israel. I believe that it'll be possible to walk back from there after this conflict ends and after leaders in the region make a strong point to their public of the benefits of a relationship with Israel, a natural synergistic relationship that should exist going forward. For now, it's very difficult to make that case while these images are saturating the media. I believe that this war will end and we will be able to get back to that because we have to, because it's so apparent. We've even seen just in the benefits that have accrued to the UAE and Bahrain and Morocco since 2020, since the Abraham Accords, that there are businesses that have been benefiting by this. There are exchanges in security and in medical technology and in water resource management that have flowed from the Abraham Accords. I believe we'll find ways after this war to return to that trajectory.
All right, Mr. Isaacson, before we let you go, I want to understand from your perspective, one last question. There is now a sense of growing or rising anti-Semitism globally. Do you see a direct link between the Israel-Gaza war and the increase in certain anti-Jewish sentiments? And what really is the agency's primary strategy for combating it on the international stage?
Look, every time that there is a conflict in the Middle East, every time that Israel has acted to defend itself against terror, whether from Gaza or from Hezbollah in the past or other actions, there have been demonstrations in the streets of European cities and American cities as well. But it must also be said that there's I'd say a double standard applied to Israel in the international community and among activists in many places. When other conflicts arise, whether in Ukraine or whether in Sudan or Syria in the past or other places, you don't see people flooding into the streets and calling for a cutoff of relationships with that particular country. There's something specific about attacking the one state of the one Jewish state, the native land of the Jewish people, and I've got to say that that's a sort of a baseline anti-Semitism that infects a lot of international political discourse and public sentiment. I think it's time to call that out. It is possible to protest the actions of a foreign government without resorting to bias. But I believe that there is a bias that underlies a fair degree of the activism against Israel, and that affects Jewish communities around the world. It affects Jewish safety around the world. There have been physical destruction of Jewish homeowners' property and businesses. Jewish institutions have been defaced or set ablaze. People have been attacked. People have been killed over the years. Whether it's just a typical manifestation of this very long-standing, centuries-old hate, or whether it's linked in some way to actions that the Jewish state of Israel is carrying out to defend itself. A lot of it just boils down to a different standard applied to Israel and a linking of Jews around the world to the state that is the homeland of the Jewish people. And it's unfair and it needs to be called out. And that's why AJC for years has been working with our government and with other governments to promote a much greater attention to this problem and security for vulnerable Jewish institutions, and the need to create national strategies and to appoint coordinators for the fight against anti-Semitism and other bigotries, but especially the fight against anti-Semitism, which is frankly the dominant, by overwhelming margin, the dominant form of religious persecution and discrimination in our country and in many countries. So much more attention needs to be paid. There was a very good national strategy that was created during the Biden administration. AJC played a role in helping to create that national strategy and promoting it. Other countries in Europe especially have developed national strategies against anti-Semitism. We've worked very closely with the coordinators of the European Union and of individual European countries on these issues, as well as in Latin America, as well as elsewhere. There is a great deal of attention that has been paid, but more needs to be paid to provide for that security and to change the mindset of people who single out Jews for attack for a whole host of ancient reasons. And it's not only what's going on in the Middle East, it's just something that we've had to suffer and deal with, as you know, for centuries. Fortunately, I must say, India has been almost unique in the world in having no history of anti-Semitism. It is something that is just one of the precious elements of the relationship that the Jewish people have with India that AJC certainly honors, and one of the reasons that has motivated our long-standing engagement with your country and with our Indian American countrymen in the United States.
Well, Mr. Jason Isaacson, thank you so much for speaking to us on Focal Length. It's always a pleasure to have you. And with that, viewers, it's a wrap on this episode of Focal Length. For more international news and updates, stay tuned to NewsX World.